E-
Hi,
Hi.
everyone. It's so nice to see you. This is Thursday, November 20th, and this is Transgender Day of Remembrance. It is Craigor's birthday. Um,
Yesterday, yesterday was my birthday.
okay.
Suzette is next. Suzette is next. Yes.
All right, Suzette.
Don't
Yeah.
ask me how old. I'm just old AF. That's all I'm saying.
Aw.
So, and we're talking tonight about the Red Road and a little bit, so that kind of leads us into a discussion about Thanksgiving. Of course, anything about any of these topics, including the birthdays, is fair game, but um, I, and but this is our last meeting before Thanksgiving, and I assume none of you want to meet on Thanksgiving. Is that correct?
Girl, bye.
There's my football game on.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to confirm. And I guess Christmas and New Year's will fall on a Thursday as well. So
Wow.
Oh yeah, Christmas does. Yeah. Whereas Christmas Eve is Wednesday. Yeah.
Mhm.
Church is having a Christmas Eve
yes.
service.
Okay. Okay. So if happy to meet any of those days, but I don't want to be the only one to show up.
Mhm.
So we'll close it off unless I hear otherwise. You can text me if you like extra support for the holidays and want to meet.
We'll
Uh,
probably talk to you
okay,
on one of
so
those days, Carol. Yeah. I mean, Paul and I actually got invited somewhere for Thanksgiving. So, right, no, believe it or not. And but the other days we'll just probably be sitting here in Austin, so we can connect if it feels right.
okay, all right, interesting. Okay, I'm just gonna a lot of you I don't think follow the Facebook devotions for resurrection. So I'm just gonna read you one from earlier this week that kind of inspired this topic. This is the devotions that I post are written by Stephen Charleston. He was the president of my seminary when I went there, and he's just a beautiful man. He's an Episcopal priest. I think he's a bishop. And yeah, Bishop Stephen Charleston, and he's also an elder of the Choctaw Nation. And he wrote for November 18th, I stand within the circle of life. Above me the open sky, below me the ground of love. In four directions, I recognize the compass that binds me to all living things. This is my spiritual gyroscope, the equilibrium of kinship. I walk in balance. I walk in beauty. I walk the seeker's way. I listen to the voice of my elders. I am family before I am me. I measure what I receive by what I give. This is the red road, ancient and profound, that leads to God's good medicine, to the camp of all my relations, the home of every tribe. I just thought that was so beautiful. And it's so rich. There's so much in there. I'm not even sure where to start with that. But it it really brings to mind how much wisdom there is uh, in what he's referring to as the red road, um, and just as a white woman who's not from those traditions, I just want to acknowledge how blessed I am to um, have been touched by the wisdom of the Red Road, and how that's helped me grow. Um, and so I think that's a good place to start talking about Thanksgiving and what's really there. There's kind of a lot to unpack. What other thoughts did this reading bring to mind for you?
What?
Gregor?
Okay, so when you sent the email earlier, to be honest with you, I really had to go and look up what does the red road mean. It's not something that I was familiar with, to be honest. And so, would you explain it in case I'm not the only one? Would you explain it to the group?
You're
Okay.
not the only one.
I don't know what that is
Okay,
either.
I would just say that the red road is just a way of saying the spiritual practices of Native Americans.
Okay.
Red road.
Mom,
Or the traditions, not just spiritual practices, but spiritual practices and traditions of Native Americans. That's how I would describe it.
Mom,
What?
the guy cooking. The guy cooking. What I can.
Jared?
Yes, the kinship worldview is so wonderful, right? This idea of partnering with nature, with reality, with all the things, right? You know, and really taking in the um, the whole of reality really turns our colonial mindsets on its edge, right? Because Christianity unfortunately doesn't have a lot of that, right? It really doesn't, unfortunately, have emphasized the respect, you know, like because like you have to have a specific reading, right, of like the Bible to get a lot of the best parts. Like you have to read it with through the lens of love in order to gain these sort of insights. And even then, it's not as clearly set as a lot of indigenous wisdom that's specifically geared towards, you know, the honoring of the ancestry, the honoring of the objects, and the reality that objects are not objects. They're all animistically real, and they all have a spirit, and they all have soul, and you know the spirit of God is within them too, right? And it's this whole thing that, you know, I really love about all indigenous spiritual systems and cultures, that they have this sort of, you know, universal in common. It's so romantic. It's so cherishable. And it's just, I love it. I love it.
Some of the traditions that I've one of the first traditions that I was exposed to was Lakota, and we learned how to make a medicine wheel, and we learned about the 4 directions, and I've bought some books and continued that. I kind of built a medicine wheel on my land in Amarillo, just for me. I wasn't trying to appropriate. I wasn't trying to, claim this as my tradition or anything. It was just my personal use. It was just meaningful, and it was something that I felt very, very, very healing. Or I shouldn't say just my personal use, but I mean, it's kind of built for a group use. But and as Jared said, just this kinship. I also was able to have a work assignment of about 6 weeks or so in the Navajo Nation, um, and and I, I learned a lot there, and I started out very ignorant, I think, but they were very gracious to forgive me some of my faux pas, and invite me into some circles, and one of this phrase that Bishop Charleston used about I walk in beauty that is a Navajo, that there was a Navajo saying that was very prevalent. I walk in beauty, beauty before me. I'm probably going to mess this up, so I'm sorry if I leave out some lines, but beauty before me, beauty behind me, beauty beside me, beauty above me, beauty beneath me. And it speaks to just the connection that Jared mentioned about just the connection with all living things. And I think that's really key to understanding. I also got to do a special class with the Yaqui Indians in which span Mexico and the U.S. across the southern Arizona border, and so I'm sure that all the border issues have really messed that up. But they have some incredible traditions around Easter that I'd love to talk to you all about sometimes. But the thing I remember the most was there was this their traditions just enacted so much during Holy Week. And on the Saturday, the day before Easter, there was this big battle that was waged between good and evil. And the good was represented by these little girls in their Easter bonnets whose weapon was flowers. And we all got to throw confetti to represent flowers. And the more confetti, the more the evil was driven back.
Oh, man.
And I really love that.
May I think
Yeah, ask.
yeah, like I got my mic again. He got back on you. What happened? You got kicked.
Well, the one that we watched, The Good Side won. And I was like, I don't know whatever happens if they don't. But you gotta, you gotta bring your flowers and your love. Fight the evil back. Anyway, I didn't mean to get off on that tangent. There's a lot of symbolism there, and a lot of Christian traditions come have been kind of derived from more native cultures, not Native American, but a lot of like Celtic traditions and more animistic type religions who do honor the earth and things more. So that's where we may talk about that more during Advent as we're coming up to Christmas. I'd love to have a session just to talk about the symbolism of Advent, and that would be fun, I think. Anyway, let's talk a little bit. These rich spiritual practices are just they're ancient. They're much they predate Christianity quite a bit, and are there's just been so much that goes on. One of the things that I think people don't realize is that that some of the stories that we were told about Thanksgiving has to do specifically with a tribe called the Wampanoag tribe, and the Puritan settlers we called pilgrims from the Mayflower. And there was actually a meeting between the two, but it wasn't nearly like what our elementary school describe it as. And both groups had a history of Thanksgiving celebrations, but that was not what they were gathering for. And the Wampanoag did have specific harvest Thanksgiving type celebrations in the past, but the idea of Thanksgiving and harvest wasn't even brought into what those meetings were about until like the 1800s, when this 3-day meeting actually happened in 1621. So it was many generations later when we got this story about the Thanksgiving. The Thanksgiving that the Puritans had celebrated was not a feast at all, but a fast. When they celebrated Thanksgiving, it was more like a fast. Why don't I don't mean to control the narrative completely here. Somebody tell me about um, what you were taught about Thanksgiving and how you feel about that,
And what?
Craig?
Um, so everything that I learned growing up was everything stereotypical that, you would imagine in American cultural coloring in books of, you know, the the pilgrims with their hats sitting down with the natives sharing a spread, with like fill in the blank maize in the background or something like that, and making little turkeys and things out of paper. And I think the first time that I knew that the stories that we were told in school did not reflect reality was in a movie that I now watch every Thanksgiving, which was Adam's Family Values. Um, Amazing, classic, never to be duplicated. But in Adam's Family Values, they basically send away Wednesday Adams, played by the immaculate Christina Ricci, even at her young age then, to a like a camp where they're meant to um, do a Thanksgiving play, and all of the popular girls get all of the good roles in the play, and they give her the stereotypical quote unquote Indian role, and she gives a like absolutely. She's supposed to just say, "Oh, thank you for sharing this meal with us, almighty white people," basically, and then ends up giving like going off script and giving an absolutely scathing speech where she talks about like the slaughter of the natives and everything that's horrible that's happened, and then leads all of the unpopular kids who have been given roles as the native tribes in like a revolt against the summer camp that they are attending. Um, and before that, I was like, when I watched that, first of all, epic as a child seeing this, and then, but after that, I was like, I think that changed partially my entire like worldview in a way, because that was the first indication that I had of, oh, you mean the things that people are telling us are not always true? And then it was like, okay, I will learn what you were teaching me, and then I will go hoof my way over to the library and try to find out other stuff too. So, you know,
Nice, and
thanks,
that's a
Adam's family.
yeah, that's a beautiful example of how modern art and creativity can just slip in this wonderful education and I mean there's always something any of us can do. I love that you brought that in. So uh, some of the things that I just researched just this week I didn't really know about that and that's interesting what you said about Wednesday Adams because um the what I read there was like a 3 day basically political meeting that happened and the there wouldn't have been a there were like 29 native men there. So Wednesday wouldn't Wednesday's character might not have even been there.
Hmm.
But they said I guess the Puritans were having some sort of harvest celebration and started setting off cannons and shooting guns and it's because the Wampanoag had already um, entered into a treaty with them for defense for both of them. The Wampanoag had been, in the hundreds and however many years since Columbus uh, had just been decimated by a disease, and so they needed protection from other tribes. And the Puritans were just starving and pretty defenseless themselves. So they entered into some treaties to help defend each other. And so when gunshots were fired, um, a lot of the native men came running to say, "Do you need our help?" Basically, and a lot of the food was supplied by them, particularly venison, as well as some corn from the Puritans, which the natives had taught them how to grow and harvest. Jared and Leo.
I think Kreger had his hand up first, no? No?
Okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I just wanted to share. I do come from, well, indigenous background and native background. So you're right. Like this season is very like a type of like fasting season because most crops are coming to an end, and basically the corn that we collected, like the leftover corn that's now dry, we use it to make some indigenous cookies, which are called tlaxcales. And so we're using all the dry corn, right, to make tortillas, to make tamales. We're using the leaves, the husk from the corn or whatever, to make tamales. So we're basically gathering all of our like natural resources that we have left over from Mother Nature to basically to survive, from here to like February, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then in February we start, planting our crops and all of that. But yeah, you're right that this is like the season for fasting, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but when it's interesting because we never celebrated Thanksgiving, and coming to the States, we never celebrated Thanksgiving. Like the first 10 years, we never celebrated Thanksgiving. And then I guess we just went with the flow and became Americanized. And we say, okay, we'll start celebrating Thanksgiving since everyone is doing it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
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 Oh, you're on mute, Carol.
Well, there's certainly something to be said about giving thanks, but because of the things that happened after that 3-day meeting, including much of the tribe being decimated within one generation, about treaties being broken, about land being stolen, all of those things, my understanding is many Native Americans consider Thanksgiving a day of mourning. Yeah, and so I can certainly understand why it wasn't celebrated at first. And Abraham Lincoln is the first one who made it a celebration, but when it was first suggested as a celebration, it was it was actually like celebrating the quote unquote victories over the Native Americans, the massacres. I'm not saying that's what Abraham Lincoln wanted it to be. He wanted it to be more unifying. It was like during the Civil War that it was suggested as a national holiday. But before that, it was it's just tragic. It's just tragic to think of the um, of what happened. So I'm going to start talking for a minute here, Kreger.
So what I want to know is you know, when these communications and the treaties or whatever they were, when those were first developed, on whose how did this communication occur? On whose terms was it? Did the Indians learn how to interpret English, or did the white people learn how to, understand what the tribes were saying? Like, on whose terms? How did the language and how did the communication actually occur? That's my question.
Well, there are stories through the years of interpreters, often women, often Native American women. But I mean, I don't know. Obviously, I wasn't there. But I mean, the treaties seemed real and beneficial for both parties. But then it was.
It just for peoples that don't know each other, it would take considerable amount of time and desire to be in relationship to learn how to understand how someone is communicating with you.
Yes.
You don't just,
Remember, I mean,
I'm
when
trying
this
to learn Spanish,
happened,
you don't.
yeah, and the people who are in power are not usually the ones bending. Almost never, almost never. And but I mean, there were European settlers, if you want to call them that, since I guess since 1492 or earlier than that. So there was plenty of time for people to interact and learn some languages. And all through time, there are also stories of like trappers and traders and people like that who learned to communicate with various Native American tribes. So yeah, and just having been involved in in peripherally, at least through with deaf communities, people can learn to communicate in one way or another when the desire or the need is there. They really can. But it's the people in power who broke these treaties, who betrayed these political alliances. Jared?
Yes, excellent questions, Gregor, as always. And for me, I guess to answer one of the questions, I guess for me, like I learned all the normal stuff that Craig was speaking about, classic, everybody was friends until they weren't, right? Because it was at like my husband and were just talking, and it was actually it was over hundreds, like sorry, 100 years, right? While the boarding schools were occurring, right? That the treaties were signed. So during a process of actual colonization, right? It didn't just Thanksgiving and then boarding schools, right? Like they were doing all these tactics, right? But what I actually really wanted to, like ask, and in like a general way, in the spirit of like the kinship worldview, there's this idea that is actually kind of close to the indigenous Filipino like ideology of like land, where we kind of like have like a really really intimate relationship with like the nature, the land, and we literally it's a part like the practice of being able to take care and notice things in nature is also like it's the same as ancestral veneration, right? Because it's like you would see like, oh, this creature is like the spirit animal of this ancestor, and you could and like, oh, this plant is like the favorite flower and it bloomed for this ancestor, right? And so that brings me to my question of so every one of us here, like we are all on stolen land. Do we know what the like land original owners of the land that we're on?
Yeah, that's a good question. Which brings me to something else that I put in the email that I was part of my comment on the devotion. I am lucky to live in Taos, where it's, I think, one of the most ancient, still active pueblos in the nation, and the pueblo is just a beautiful place um, to visit, and I have friends who live there, and they continue to have a lot of traditions and everything. So they so there has been a discussion. Many things in Taos are named after Kit Carson, including a very large park. And Kit Carson led a lot of massacres of Native Americans. And so that has been challenged. There has been like a 10-year push to rename Kit Carson Park. And when there was actually a decision by the city to rename it about 10 years ago, and the Pueblo objected and said, wait, we weren't consulted. And so I was thrilled to read in the news just earlier this week that they're going ahead with the renaming, and that it also has stipulations. For those of you who might not have read the email, let me read you a little bit about this. The Taos News announced the renaming of Kit Carson Park to Red Willow Park. This is what they said. The town will issue a formal, public, and recorded acknowledgement that the lands in question are unceded Tiwa territory, that Taos Pueblo lead the renaming process, that Taos Pueblo develop and approve signage, school curriculum, and visitor resources about the park and valley history, that the town recognize and protect the Pueblo's ceremonial calendar and access to traditional spaces, restriction on third parties making public statements purporting to represent Taos Pueblo, and a public apology and correction plan for instances where the town has privileged outsider narratives or failed to consult Taos Pueblo. And by the way, the naming of it as Red Willow Park comes from the word Taos is believed to be a translation of the place of the red willow in Tiwa, which is Taos Pueblo's native language. And so I thought that was a beautiful way of recognizing the land that we're on, and not just doing lip service. And I wonder how many ways there are for us in churches and spaces to do that as well. As some of you may know, some of the suggestions from the Next Gen group have been to do a land acknowledgement. And I have a question about that, Jared. Maybe you can answer this. When I first looked up the wording for the land acknowledgement, and I looked specifically just in the zip code of the church, not just the whole Houston area, and I found, I think it was 3 tribes to acknowledge. And then when we put forward the land acknowledgement, there were more. Is that because you have a better resource, or because you expanded the area?
It is because well, you have to also look at the history. And so it's like, like whenever the tribes are like in the area, there's like tribal wars and stuff, right? And so it's more Manny specializes in, like the indigenous, indigeneity. So he did look up the history and the timelines of these cultures to see, well, like when you have a land tug of war, you have to acknowledge all the peeps, right? Involved in the tug of war. And so yeah, I hope that helps.
Yes.
Really, actually, just and I kind of want to like take what you said very quickly, because it's literally as easy as Googling it, just like what Joseph said too, right? Like, just if you don't know what land you're on, right? Like, you can, in this time period, like there are resources to just Google it, so what tribes to look up to, maybe to give grace, give homage, give love to, right? You could, because especially when we like don't know how Thanksgiving affects us, and how these things affect us, I think we do this thing where we sort of depersonalize it, and we just kind of, it's like history, and it's like abstract, it's like the history over there, when you're literally on it, right? Like, you're on the history of the land that's broke, and it's not, it's, you have to look at, well, how did the homeowners get this land? How did the salespeople who I bought this land from get this land, right? Who is, if this is my family's land, is it my family's land? Right? Like, these sort of things you have to ask yourself, because this is the history of America that we can't, if we act bashfully toward, we sort of are complicit in a lot of the actual fight that the indigenous and Latino community are like struggling towards, because you can't, like, it's all so very connected to what's happening in America right now. And like, it's just literally a Google search away.
Yes, and along with that, the Google searches can also lead you to tribes that are still that still have presence in the area, and that can lead to some wonderful discussions about reparations. And at some point, I want to talk about what gratitude can look like, once we acknowledge who has paid the cost, for some of these things that we're grateful for. Joseph?
Yeah, I think I'm remembering a course that I took. It's really less of a course. It's more of a meant to be in a live sort of meeting group called Waking Up to Whiteness. And people in that group, some of them had taken to putting, just like we put our pronouns sometimes, just putting the tribe of the land that they were currently living in as their location. And this would appear like in Zoom meetings like we're in now, right under a name, or it would appear in an email signature. And I felt it was a very simple and meaningful thing to do. Also, yeah, the conversation gets skewed really quickly because of what we're bumping up against right now in in our discussion, which is there was no such thing as ownership. When you're one with the land, you don't own the land. It's more like the land owns you because you revere the land for your food. And I'm just listening to the little bit that Leo shared, even like this time was governed by nature because we didn't have any food to eat and we knew we needed to prepare. And so there was maybe a deeper level of reverence there that I can never understand. Not as this human form anyway. I'm sitting here thinking about how many carbs I ate today. You know, like I can't I can't fathom storing food. I don't know what I would do with dried corn other than plant it and hope it grows before I starve.
Wow.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah, really good points, Joseph. Thank you. And I do recall when there some of the housing was so when I worked on the Navajo Nation, I didn't understand about some of the housing, but I do recall that that um, the nobody could own the land. They kept explaining to me that that's why people don't build, that's why there's not a lot of big apartment complexes or anything like that here because nobody can own the land. And yeah, there's a lot of ancestral acknowledgement of who's been where. And like in the Pueblo, my um, my friend during the celebrations, they have a specific room in the Pueblo where their ancestors called home, and that's where they can invite us in for a feast if we're um, when we're able, but it's not the owning of the land. It's a completely different concept. Craig?
Go get what you can eat.
Just a couple thoughts, kind of veering from Jared's question over to Carol's. Hope I can segue from one to the other. So in response to Jared's question of do you know what tribes here? Only because you posted it in the land acknowledgement. But I do know, so kind of veering from that, when in the time I briefly spent in Canada, and was attending the MCC Toronto for a number of months, that was the first place that I encountered land acknowledgements. And when they started off their Sunday announcements with a land acknowledgement, I was like, "What? What's going on? What is this?" And so I kind of went back home to the Airbnb that I was staying at and just did a little Googleification, and started reading about that, and then was watching stuff in the news. And when I was there, there was a prominent news story about the the schools. Like Jared, you kind of were talking about some of this, but um, I don't know if everyone here is familiar with some of the native schools that existed and what kind of happened. If you're not, I won't go into it. Google, it's very interesting. Um, if you want to know more atrocities. But there was a public acknowledgement from the Canadian government, an apology during Justin Trudeau's tenure that this happened, and so it was very much in the like news cycle. So I got to kind of learn about this history, and I will be very honest and say. Um, my first thought when I heard the land acknowledgement was that it felt to me to be performative. And the reason that I say that is because I was hearing it there, and then I was hearing it in a few other like broadcasts as well. And it felt rote, I guess, like it was just something that was being blah blahed, and there really wasn't much more to it. And my thought was, well, like, what are you doing functionally, like in the real world, to make a difference aside from saying these words? Like, what is saying these words going to do? And then I will say, after I sat with that thought for a while, I think I came to two realizations. Um, One, the acknowledgement, I think, holds value in and of itself because it is educational, and helps to spark thought and spark research, and maybe that does something, in some cases to some people, and maybe it doesn't to other cases and other individuals. But the fact that it can do something, holds weight and power in and of itself. Um, and also, I do still feel like, what are you doing realistically in the real world to like make an actual difference to these tribes and folks that still remain? So I think it's a both. It's an and, not an or necessarily, not an either or. But I will say, when it comes to Carol, your question about thankfulness, I am thankful for having been there in that time to be educated and then to go on a little bit of a mini self-educational journey, to kind of discover more. And that made me think about, well, what tribes were in Austin? Because I came from Austin. I was like, what tribes were in Austin? I started Googling, and there was this, I don't know the website now, probably could find it if I Googled it long enough, but it was an interactive map, that basically said like what tribes were here, and it would kind of, it's almost like Google Earth, like when it kind of like zooms in, and you would click into certain like zip codes or areas, and it would tell you, okay, well, this area is this tribe and this tribe, and but then it would also go in a little bit more depth to say things like tribes intermarried and then they would merge or break apart. So these were not, um, these were not always long-lasting like empires that lived and reigned for like thousands of years. There was more of a flow to it, and then of course there were also tribes that were nomadic, right? So they may have been in an area at various times, but they also may have gone in and out of the area. So it was like, to the question of what tribes belonged to these areas, that may be in some cases valid, and it may not be valid for those tribes that were nomadic and roamed, throughout different areas, and went from areas, that had abundance to less abundance depending on climates, and went to different places throughout different parts of the year, or just depending on what they encountered in certain areas, may have been inclined to go elsewhere. So it was really just enlightening. So I would say I'm thankful for that experience, to gain a scope of knowledge that I never had before. Just like when I watched Addams Family, and that sparked curiosity. The land acknowledgments from Canada also sparked curiosity. So I think, there's goodness there.
Yes, and we acknowledge that it's just a starting point, but it is a starting point, and I hope that our church specifically can start using that. Lynn, I know you've got your hand up. You put a good, really nice, concise history in the chat, and I hope everybody had a chance to read that. That is very consistent with the history that I was trying to bring up, and I didn't do it very concisely. I was a bit scattered. Sorry about that. I'm going to give you a chance to talk, but I also want to note what Joseph put in the chat about, the red road seems to be the native indigenous way of how we each learn the oneness of us. In Buddhism, we often referred to as true nature, and more broadly in modern spiritual traditions as Holy Spirit or soul or self. So yeah, that would be a very, um, that's I want to think more on that. Lynn, we are nearing the end of our time, so I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to talk, but you haven't said much so far, so go for it.
Hey,
Just-
you go, you.
So I was just thinking in terms of the Red Road. Tonight was the first time I had ever heard of it and didn't know anything about it. But so like Krager, I went to do some research about it, and what I even from listening about it today, what I see from a Black American perspective, Thanksgiving for Black American families has never been about anything other than giving thanks. Not political, not anything except giving thanks that we're here as a family, giving thanks that we had the life of this loved one who passed away this year, giving thanks that we had this new one born into the family, giving thanks that we have a roof over our head and that we have food to eat and that we can share with others. One of the things that I remember is giving thanks, and everybody at the dinner table, because it's about eating too, it's mostly about eating and giving thanks, would have to say, yes, what are you thankful for? What are you and that's a specific question that there's not a Thanksgiving feast that I've been to in all my years where that question didn't get asked. And typically people would go around the table before we started eating and say that. So I love the very first sentence. The red rose is a phrase frequently used by natives signifying a deep commitment to living life in the best way possible. And I can just stop right there because, Black people having never owned land, descendants of slaves and, having the history that we have are similar to the indigenous people who had our land taken, or they promised us 40 acres and a mule. We never got it, and separate but equal took a long while to get here. So Thanksgiving for us has never been about anything other than giving thanks. And it irritates me still to this day that we go from Halloween to Christmas. And you don't see any celebrations of Thanksgiving. Nobody decorate. Nobody has whatever Thanksgiving in the yard or anything. Nobody gives things. We go from Halloween to Christmas and just skip Thanksgiving completely. As a society, I don't mean us here in this group, but I just, I mean.
Thanksgiving was always a pretty big celebration in my family. We, in my dad's family, we always got together with mom's side of the family at Christmas, and then dad's family at Thanksgiving, primarily because there were a couple of dads. There were some people in dad's family who joined a religion called the Worldwide Church of God or something like that didn't celebrate birthdays and therefore didn't celebrate Christmas. And so Thanksgiving just had that nice feel of inclusion in my family. That's how it seemed. And some of the when we couldn't get together or whatever, there were some beautiful celebrations that I saw happening across faiths, like the synagogue and the Unitarian Church in Amarillo often hosted together this big Thanksgiving soup supper or something like that, and it was just a beautiful ecumenical type or interfaith celebration. So I always love the interfaith type focus about Thanksgiving, but I think I didn't realize how many people were kind of left out, and I think it's important to bring that history in. And so I just wonder what's going to change in my celebrations in the future now that I recognize more of the truth of what happened. Suzette?
I just bringing it back to the church a little bit here. We almost didn't have Thanksgiving this year. And George kind of stepped in on that with, I'm not sure who else, but in my opinion, as a church, we shouldn't go straight to Christmas either, right? I'm really happy that we're doing something for Thanksgiving. And even though I can't be there to serve, I try really hard to make sure that there's something there from me. But I don't understand that as a church trying to grow in community, how that shouldn't be like one of the biggest things we do in each year. um, is to have a Thanksgiving. And we used to have Christmas baskets when we had a food pantry. I mean, all these things have gone away. You guys, Jared and Leo, and some of the newer people haven't been here long enough to know all the stuff we used to do as a church that we're not doing anymore. And it kind of makes me sad. I do like that the deacons have picked up on, doing a giving tree for the children of a needy situation. Are we doing your organization this year, Jared?
Yes, yes. The deacons have contacted me, and they are going to be doing a exposure.
That's all I wanted to bring up was that as a church, we shouldn't go from Halloween to Christmas too. That it should be the one thing that we really put out there that we're part of, and that
So what are the deacons doing for?
Oh, we, because I work at a rehab for trans folks and people who, women with children, we have a toy drive, right? And so like doing a toy drive for the, community essentially, is something that they did last year. And so they reached out again this year. But also, on what you were saying, is that like, and there's a way to do all that with while being decolonial, right? Like, I believe what we just posted in like the chat was like an example of a church literally bringing the tribe whose land, they experience, right, onto the property, right, to speak and to, give like community and like actually donate their work, and they donate their money, right, and their labor, right, in an actual beautiful exchange on for a Thanksgiving service. And like it's so possible to do all the things that we've been doing with much more thoughts and beauty that would bring in so many more people of the newer generation. Because I mean, nothing's more beautiful than watching people who have experienced settler colonization receive their due, receive what they love: connection, compassion, money, resources, things, So yeah, that's just
More connection. I like the way that you said
All of it.
more
All-
connection, more
all
hope. We are over our time, so I thank you all for participating, and I hope you were blessed by this discussion. And it'll be 2 weeks before we meet again, so we'll be in Advent by then. And so in addition to Suzette, Marco will have a birthday between now and then as well.
Mom.
Yeah.
Suzette, your birthday is tomorrow, right?
Yes, me
Yes.
and you are the twins. Always
Happy birthday, happy birthday,
Happy birthday,
happy
Suzette.
birthday.
one day away from being a Sag.
What do you?
I'm a Scorpio.
Keep that guy alone.
Marco wants to say, everybody who's traveling, be safe on the road.
Yes.
Oh, thank you, Marco.
Marco.
Okay, Kreger, would you pray us out?
Absolutely. Holy God and Holy Spirit, we're just delighted. I think we're delighted to be here tonight and talking about the origins of Thanksgiving and what it all means, what it really means. And I, for one, can testify that when I found out that they were lying to me about what Thanksgiving really means, that I had the intention of, they were lying to me about what's going on with Black people too. And that's when I made the choice, when I had the opportunity in school to read Black history that was written by Black people. And so we thank you for all the knowledge that you bring into our hearts and into our lives throughout our lives, that we can grow from and learn from. And as Maya Angelou said, when we know better, we do better. Hopefully, hopefully, amen, God, amen. So we thank you for this opportunity. We're grateful for each person who has given their time to come here this evening and speak and share. And we're just blessed. I just feel so blessed right now. It's been a wonderful week. And so just gratitude, yes, gratitude for this community, gratitude that Suzette and I are still taking another breath. And just help us to go forward in your light and love, and, help us to just make an attempt every day to be aware of something new, of something true, and of something divine. In Christ's name we pray right now. Amen.
Amen. Thank you,
Amen.
Gregor.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tomorrow, happy birthday, Craig. Happy birthday.